Hey, what's up, A-Push kids? We're back for our next lecture in AP US History. Today we're going to be covering topic 9.3, the end of the Cold War. Our learning objective today is 9C, explain the causes and effects of the end of the Cold War and its legacy on the United States. Our first key idea today says Reagan asserted U.S. opposition to communism through speeches, diplomatic efforts, limited military interventions, and a buildup of nuclear and conventional weapons. Now, Reagan wanted to try and restore America's U.S. foreign policy. He had blamed Carter for allowing America's international prestige and influence to fall. And so, as a result, Reagan's going to increase military spending, and he's going to be confronted by challenges both in the Middle East and Latin America, though he will eventually win the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Now, in the Middle East, Reagan is going to intervene in a few areas. First, in Lebanon, when violence breaks out between Israelis and Arabs in 1982. However, anti-American hostility led to a terrorist group to seize 6 U.S. hostages in Iran in 1983. Reagan's response was to not negotiate with terrorists. However, meanwhile, in 1979, a communist group called the Sandinistas came to power in Nicaragua. Now, Congress in the early 80s denied Reagan's plea to help Nicaraguan counter-revolutionaries, referred to as Contras, take back power. Now, part of that was because of some of the other ways that the Contras made money, like, for instance, smuggling cocaine into the United States. So, Congress, in fact, passed a law making it illegal to help the Contras, called the Boland Amendment. However, Reagan was committed to fighting communism and maintaining order in Latin America. So, they developed a plan to solve both of the problems in Iran and in Nicaragua at the same time. The government, to solve problem 1, illegally sold Iran weapons in exchange for the release of the 6 hostages, an arms for hostage deal, which by itself was illegal. The government then gave the money from the profits of the arms sales to Iran, to the anti-communist Contras in Nicaragua, which is the violation of the Boland Amendment. Also illegal. Now, these 2 highly illegal activities were discovered, and what became known as the IranContra Affair really rocked the Reagan administration. Reagan at the time said he had no knowledge of the scandal, although there is a decent amount of evidence to say that he knew what was going on. And the man that you see pictured on the right, by the name of Oliver North, admitted to running the operation behind the president's back. North would spend time in jail, and Reagan escaped from the scandal and became really known as the Teflon president. Leading us to key idea number 2. Increased U.S. military spending, Reagan's diplomatic initiatives, and political changes and economic problems in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union were all important in ending the Cold War. Now, Reagan, in addition to downsizing the government and creating tax cuts that we talked about in the first video of the unit, he also increased defense spending in order to restore America's place in the world. For instance, some of the things that he spent money on were the new B-1 bombers and the MX missile systems. However, Reagan viewed the USSR in a speech as the focus of evil in the modern world and a threat to U.S. security. He used what was called the zero option and sent 572 nuclear missiles within range of Moscow to match the USSR's ICBMs aimed at NATO nations. But by far his most ambitious plan was a massive defense system of satellites called the Strategic Defense Initiative, otherwise known as SDI, or sometimes just referred to as Star Wars. Now, SDI would have cost the U.S. government trillions of dollars at the time. Now, this is also at a time when Reaganomics involved slashing budgets for social programs. And there was a lot of thinking that SDI was really much more of someone's imagination rather than of anything actually practical, involved using beaming lasers and all those other types of science fiction technology that probably really didn't exist at the time. However, this really puts a strain on the USSR. They weren't sure if Reagan was really serious about now carrying the Cold War into space, something the USSR couldn't do since they were starting to face economic failure at the time. Now, in 1985, a new leader of the Soviet Union will take charge by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev. And he's going to try and create moderate reforms to try and save the Soviet Union and Russia at the time. Those two reforms include perestroika, which introduced modern capitalism and allowed some business and private property ownership. In addition to this, Gorbachev also introduced glasnost, which gave freedom of speech as well as competitive elections within the USSR. Now, Reagan had finally found someone he could work with to try and reduce Cold War tensions. And so in 1987, then Reagan actually goes to Moscow, something unheard of at the time, and they signed what is called the INF Treaty, which helps to eliminate ICBMs that are in Europe. But despite all this, and the efforts at reform by Gorbachev, by the late 1980s, communism was falling across Eastern Europe, as countries from Poland all the way to Bulgaria started to overthrow their communist-led governments and install democracies across the region. Then, in 1989, 30 years ago, this very day that I'm recording this, as East Germans denounced communism and the Berlin Wall came down. In 1989 and 1990, Eastern European nations embraced democracy. In 1990, states within the Soviet Union broke off and formed new democratic nations. And in 1991, the USSR dissolved itself and the Cold War ended. In just 2 short years, the Cold War, which had lasted for nearly 45 years, didn't go out with a bang. It went out with a whimper as the Soviet Union dissolved and crumbled in on itself thanks to its own economic failures. Leading us to key idea number 3. The end of the Cold War led to new diplomatic relationships, but also new U.S. military and peacekeeping interventions, as well as a continued debates over the appropriate use of American power in the world. Now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Vice President George Bush is going to win the presidential election of 1988 by promising to maintain Reagan's conservative policies. But Bush will be faced with a post-Cold War world that will have many new challenges in it. And he'll be met by the first one in 1990, in what becomes known as the Persian Gulf War, when Iraq will invade their neighbor Kuwait over an oil dispute. President Bush dramatically declared, "This aggression will not stand." With Iraqi forces poised near the border of Saudi Arabia, the Bush administration dispatched 180,000 U.S. troops to protect the Saudi kingdom as part of Operation Desert Shield. Now, in a sharp departure from American foreign policy during the Reagan presidency, Bush also organized an international coalition against Iraq. He convinced Turkey and Syria to close oil pipelines and won Soviet support for an arms embargo, as well as established a multinational army to protect Saudi Arabia. Then, after Iraq would not remove their troops from Kuwait, Bush initiated Operation Desert Storm to eject Iraq from Kuwait by force. The Iraqi army, the world's 4th largest, was equipped with some of the top-of-the-line Soviet T-72 tanks and large-range artillery. But after only 1 month of bombing, the American-led coalition forces had achieved air supremacy, destroyed thousands of Iraqi tanks and artillery pieces, and had estimated destroyed up to 30% of Baghdad's forces deserted before the ground campaign started. The next president to take over, Clinton, and would also face foreign policy issues as well. Now, during the Clinton presidency, he would commit U.S. troops to peacekeeping efforts around the world. From 1995 to 1999, U.S. troops were sent to Bosnia to stop ethnic cleansing by Serbs and to Kosovo as well to stop a civil war. And then, from 1993 to 95, U.S. troops were also sent to Somalia to offer food and restore order during a civil war. We would eventually pull our troops out after several Americans were killed by essentially armed thugs in the capital of Mogadishu. However, with no traditional enemy, Americans continue to debate what our new role in the world would be. Some argue that our role was a global police power to help protect economic and human rights. Others, tired of the burden of foreign conflicts and wary of another Vietnam, called for a retreat from the U.S. from the world stage. Well, that brings us toward the end of our lecture today. Understand that a few big ideas was that Reagan's policy and his military spending to combat communism around the world, along with the economic failures of the Soviet Union, would eventually lead to the collapse of communism in Europe and in the USSR. However, this would lead America into new uncharted territory, as Americans debated what our role in the world would be. And we became involved in peacekeeping operations, not only in the Persian Gulf War, but also in places like Africa and Somalia, and in the Balkans and places like the former Yugoslav republics. Don't forget to smash that like and subscribe button. Until next time, and as always, go Pack.